Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. This is Andre Davis and our new narrative. And today is June the 9th. And I'm going solo today. Was having some technical difficulties. I was trying to always have a dialogue here with me and someone else. Last couple of times it's been me and my friend from who I met in Japan back when we were students at Kansai Gaidai University. That was my friend Leo Washington on the last podcast. Pretty good podcast. Check it out. I'll try and leave a link. Well, I will put, it'll be at the end of this podcast. You can just go roll over into that video. But yeah, today is June the 9th, and I want to follow up on a subject that we actually touched upon in the last podcast. But before I start, please like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Turn the notification bell on so you can be notified when I come to you with some more information. But with that said, the last time I did the podcast, I talked about the second-degree murder charges that were brought against the killer of Mr. Floyd. And I was worried that elevating the charges from third degree to second degree is risky. And the reason I thought that was because I mistakenly assumed that the prosecution would have to prove intent, which now I know they don't. The prosecution does not have to prove that the police officer intended to kill Mr. Floyd. What they have to prove instead is that Mr. Floyd was feloniously assaulted, which I believe has much wider implementations than just the interaction and unfortunate death of Mr. Floyd. Basically, to say that Mr. Floyd was feloniously assaulted means that what seems to be obvious to anybody in the world, that putting your knee on someone's neck should not be a part of your duties as a police officer. But, if anyone has a link to this, please let me know in the comments section. But I know that particular restraining, that particular form of restraint is called the Israeli something. I can't remember where I saw it, but apparently it is taught. And it is known to be inherently dangerous, but I didn't read anywhere, and I haven't done any extensive research on this, but I didn't read anywhere that it was forbidden. So my concern is, and I think we should all be concerned, is that if one person on that jury doesn't believe that that was a felonious assault by a police officer in his line of duty. Now, when you look at that morally, you're morally outraged. Well, I get it. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be prosecuted and that they shouldn't be found guilty. I want to make sure that they are found guilty because of what is likely to happen if they are not found guilty. Welcome to 2020, right? This year started off with a coronavirus, then we get an economy that got put on lockdown with 30, 40 million people unemployed, which requires the U.S. to borrow money from the Federal Reserve Bank, to pay people who are staying at home because of the virus. You're talking so far, I think it's like $9 trillion. There's a negative effect to printing all that money. And that is, as I talk about very often, your purchasing power. It's just your purchasing, with every dollar that's printed, your purchasing power just gets weaker and weaker. And below me, that's real money, gold, silver. And the purchasing power of gold and silver has to go up. So, yeah, we got 34 million people unemployed. A lot of those people won't be able to get their jobs back because the businesses were teetering. A lot of these businesses were teetering anyway. So a lot of these people will not be able to get their jobs back. And then we get the protest, rightfully so, concerning the death of Mr. George Floyd, and riots. And what concerns me most of all, is the riots, because when you're rioting, you tend to get pepper sprayed and you tend to cough. And people rioting during a pandemic, coughing all over everybody, well, you don't have to be Nostradamus to see what's going to happen. You're going to get COVID part 2. Everybody have to go back on punishment, go back to your rooms. The economy will suffer more, which will require the government to borrow more money from the Federal Reserve, which will make all of your purchasing power weaker and weaker. So if you're a saver, if you're saving in dollars, man, I don't think I need to explain too much further, man. But yeah, it's gonna be a rude awakening for a lot of people, especially if these guys are not convicted, and then you get protest round number 2, and at that point you would have had, a spike in coronavirus, a spike in unemployment. Time has gone on, so you have people in their houses. They're already mad at each other because they can't leave and they're stuck with each other and seeing them every day. Tensions are high. And then if these guys walk, man, if you think what was going on last weekend and currently now with all these protests and riots, it's just going to be so much worse. And so that's my concern with elevating that charge to a second-degree murder charge. I would have went with the slam dunk. I think most of you would go for the slam dunk, but apparently they wanted to give the killer of Mr. Floyd more time. My thing is, you got to convict a guy before you sentence him. So with that said, just wanted to address that issue and talk about something that's kind of related to the protests, and that's the rioters, right? So this is me. I strongly believe that these Antifa people are a bunch of anti-capitalists, and they're using the black community as a Trojan horse to get in and cause havoc. And one of the havocs that they will cause, or have caused, is these riots, which cause people to get pepper sprayed, which will cause a spike in corona, which will cause people to have to go back home, which will cause unemployment rates to spike, which will cause the United States to have to print more money, which will cause maybe the collapse of the dollar. Now, this isn't a channel to talk about in the Fed, but if you don't know anything about the Fed, I suggest you go and do your research today. The Federal Reserve is not your friend. But yeah, I'm calling the Antifa people lions in wolves' clothing, right? And I'm really concerned that these protests will be the cause, not the protests. I mean, the protests, of course, I am very happy to see, white people, black people, Asian people, gay people, straight people, Christians, atheists marching arm in arm against this injustice. Very happy about that. I'm concerned with the organization behind all these riots. I'm also, I'm also wondering how all of these spontaneous protests around the globe are starting. It seems to me, and I could be totally wrong, I don't know if I even should address this because this is pure speculation, but like in New Zealand, Australia, maybe they do have Black Lives Matter organizations there, but I know I'm more confident in them having anti-capitalist organizations in these countries outside of the United States that seem to be springing up all these protests. And I think as a nation, especially people from the Black community, just beware of lions in wolves' clothing, right? Yes, they seem to care about the Black community, but where are these people at when you're talking about police brutality? Where are they at when it's non-Black people? If it's about justice and not revenge, I could be wrong. Maybe it's just totally about revenge. I don't know, but I'm assuming that the Black Lives Matter group is concerned with police brutality for more than people outside of the Black community. Maybe I'm not. Correct me in the comments, and not your opinion. Give me a statement that they said that we don't care about anybody but Black people. Hey, that's what they are. But there are other people outside of the Black community that are killed by police in the line of duty. And I want to bring forth an example, not to discredit what happened to George Floyd by any means. But I think if we're looking for justice, I think we need to look outside of the Black community as well, because non-Black people do get killed by police, okay? And here's a mother, and you may have heard of her by the time you watch this video, but if you haven't heard of her, here she is. I'll let her do the talking for herself.
When you turn on the news, you see this, the Dallas police found a body in this creek or that road and all this stuff. Well, that's what they told me. They found a body. How many people did they tell they found a body? How many other mothers are out there that don't know what happened to their child? How many stories do they tell all the mothers that they found a body, that they were happy and waved to the cops and thanked them? They were in a bar and had a heart attack. What? What are all these things? What? Oh, okay. Well, how many people are there? How many more will there be? The best thing that can happen to my son right now is for these policemen to lose their badge in every jurisdiction in the United States of America, and let these other cops that are good, wonderful, decent people do their job, because they're there. But get the rotten apples out of the barrel. And the same with the paramedics. You watch that. Anybody that stands there and talks and carries on and never does CPR, not even for a second. It's real hard to hear my son scream, "Help me," and cry. And they laugh at him, and they torture him, and they kill him, and they have fun doing it, and they keep doing it even when he's not breathing, and then they're still making jokes. Because, see, it was fun for them. They were all in a circle having fun, laughing. They all had...
Now I'm gonna stop there. It's hard to watch, like George Floyd. Anyone, any mother who loses a son, a father loses a son, a son loses a father. I mean, the grief is just hard. But this story didn't even make it out of Dallas. And it's surprising. And the title of this podcast is Our New Narrative. And my contention, is my firm belief that if it doesn't fit in the narrative, it just won't make it out. The media just doesn't care. And that narrative is mainly Black victimization. Somebody other than white, straight people have to be victimized for it to make the news. Now, again, I'm not discounting anyone who's been victimized, right? And I'm not making excuses for cops who kill anybody. What I'm saying is, if the narrative is constantly, for generations, it's primarily 90% of what you're hearing growing up as an African American is, the man is out to get you. And if there's a situation where this happens to people outside of the community. It just gets buried or squashed. No one cares about it. And I don't think it's not right. And two, it just leads to a warped sense of reality. And a lot of people live under that fear that, there's a racist around every corner, which that's not true. The statistics don't say that, and most people are good people. But again, for generation after generation, all you're hearing is you're black, so therefore someone out there doesn't like you. Your boss is a racist. The reason you ain't get the job is because your boss is a racist, or why even study hard because you can't really get in the school you want. Blah blah blah. Just these narratives are dangerous, in my opinion. And just to give some context to what she's talking about, you can actually see what happened to her son. And I'll play this for you guys. This happened August 6th, 2016.
You got any name on them or anything?
Just Tony's the only thing we can get.
Help me! Tony!
Hey, get on the ground.
No, you're gonna kill me.
I'm not gonna kill you.
You're gonna kill me. You're gonna kill me.
Hey, Tony. Tony.
Relax, man. No. Get you some help, Tony. Relax, man. Just stay down. Tony.
No!
Tony.
Just keep him down. That's too much.
Stop it. All right. Hey, you're okay. You're okay. You're okay.
Yacht club in Rockball. That's supposed to be.
Will you let me go, please?
Hey, Tony. We're trying to help you out, man. Just relax. I'm gonna try to change the cuffs.
Okay.
That way we don't have to worry about it once he's up.
Yeah.
Get the Green Oaks cocktail special.
Yeah.
It is.
That's what she said. Had him down like this because they had him just sitting down. He's like rolling, like pulling. And I was like,
Schizophrenia.
He damn near got kicked.
took
So.
something. Hey, Tony, what'd you take? Yeah, he took something.
So what's the plan? HMFIC out here, sir.
We're gonna, if they'll strap him to a gurney, one of y'all.
Well, they can both ride in the back. I'll drive the ambulance.
This is not the 11th.
Yeah, he was scrumming a little too much.
With us?
You all right, bud? You gonna be all right.
Is he acknowledging you more?
He's moving.
Oh, I thought he nodded yes to your question.
Tony.
Tony.
Tony. He's breathing. Tony.
I'll make sure you're still breathing.
Yeah.
His nose is buried in there.
I think he's still breathing. He's snorted. Tony.
It's alcohol. What the fuck?
Is he asleep?
He's
Snoring, that's what it was.
Yeah, he's asleep.
Tony.
Tony!
Back to school. Wake up.
I don't want to go to school, Mom.
First day, you can't be late.
Tony.
We bought you new shoes for the first day of school. Come on.
Made breakfast.
So right about there, Toney is no longer with us. And so you compare the two cases of Mr. Floyd and Mr. Toney Timpa. With Toney, you don't see or you don't feel any evil there. You just see or feel like these guys are very cavalier, incompetent, just dumb, right? But you can't politicize incompetence. You can't politicize being cavalier. You can't politicize being dumb. You can politicize race. They found his body under a bench. Can you imagine if a black person, they had that on film, they called the mom and told her, I'm sorry, we found your dead son under a bench somewhere. Meanwhile, Toney called the police because he was schizophrenic and on drugs, and he was worried about his own safety, so he called the police. Before the police arrived, apparently a security guard was able to cuff him. He was having an episode, and in my opinion, I don't know the outcome of this case. I'll leave that up to y'all to look at it. The outcome is not why I brought it to your attention. I brought it to your attention because of the narrative that it doesn't fit into and why you never heard of it. If that was a black man, trust me, everyone would know about it. Why? Because it can be politicized. And if you've been following the channel, you know one of my favorite quotes of all time from a conversation between Andrew Johnson, president after Lincoln was assassinated, when he was talking to the Postmaster General, Mr. Montgomery Blair. And they were saying that now that the war is over, meaning the Civil War, the key to politics is no longer slavery, the institution of slavery. If you were pro-slavery, too bad. If you were anti-slavery, guess what? There's no more issue. There's nothing to talk about. There's no reason for you to ever bring up slavery again as a politician. So the key to politics post-Civil War, according to them, is race. You can politicize race, and they've been doing that ever since the Civil War. Now, I'll go into other episodes. I'll talk about how race wasn't a real factor until it wasn't. Race was a factor, but it really took off after the Civil War. So before the Civil War, it's mainly about the institution of slavery and not necessarily the slave. But I digress. How this relates to lions in wolves' clothing, in my opinion, and I'm calling the Antifa people that, they, in my opinion, and they'll probably tell you, they're anti-capitalist. They want to bring the whole system down. And one way to do that is to, like a Trojan, like use the black community as a Trojan horse, keep race in our face, keep that narrative constantly projected upon us so that we never think about what's below me, real money. You got hundreds of thousands of people out there protesting, but if those same amount of people, if you knew like what was going on with your money via a debt-based monetary system, you'll probably get the same amount of people out there protesting. But since most people will see this, don't know it, you're not going to get those. You're not going to get that crowd out there. So again, I'm gonna suggest that you do your own research. I'll bring some things to you later on about the Fed, but there's plenty of people out there talking about it. Peter Schiff is one of them that comes to mind. But I want to move on and talk about a little bit more of that narrative. And I'm hoping you guys are following. If you're still here, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment. Turn the bell button on, the notification bell on. I'm gonna pivot a little bit, but stay on point with this message. I mean, this narrative thing, this negative Black victimization narrative. So I was looking for a movie to watch, and I came across this movie called The Glass Castle. And when I looked at who was in it, as you can see there, Woody Harrelson, there's who else is in here? Brie Larson, Naomi Watts. I was like, oh, this must have been one of those movies where they just put all these stars in here and it just bombs. That's why I haven't heard of it. But see, it got 7.1 stars, but I saw on Rotten Tomatoes it got like 66. So I was like, it might not be that good. And then I looked at what was it about. And here, whatever it says here at the bottom, what I got out of the movie, because I decided to watch it, was about a poor white family. I mean, poor, homeless, squatters. And I'm not talking about during the Dust Bowl. I'm talking about in the 1990s. They were poor. And the consequences of being poor. That's what the movie was about to me. And eventually the family, the parents stayed together and continued to be poor, eventually squatting in New York, just living this off the grid lifestyle. But when they were growing up, the kids were poor. So it wasn't like, hey, we're hippies, we just want to live in this commune, we're always happy. No, these kids would go to sleep hungry. And I grew up in the projects back in the 70s. I have never gone to sleep hungry, right? So at the end of I don't want to give it away, but basically all the children are okay. One of the children wrote the story as a memoir, and she becomes well off. All of the children become well off. But at the end of the movie, I thought, man, that was probably a better book than the movie, which is normally the case. Not saying anything bad about the movie, but at the end of the movie, I was surprised at how good the movie was. Like, Brie Larson did really well. I'm not the biggest fan of hers, but she did really well. Woody Harrelson did awesome. It was a really moving story, well acted, well directed, and I'm like, how come I've never heard of this? I consider myself, I used to consider myself a movie buff. But then it dawned on me, I tried to compare it to another movie. And maybe you can leave some comments below of some movies that were made that depicts the plight of being poor and white. And I got to leave a qualifier there. I don't mean a poor white person who becomes rich. I asked a friend of mine about this, and he gave me an example of Rocky. And, he was poor. Yeah, he was poor. And then he struggled and he became Rocky, rich and famous. I don't mean in that regard. Another good example he thought of was Good Will Hunting. And after the conversation, I thought, well, he was poor. But I believe at the end, he ended up working for the FBI, the star in Good Will Hunting, the character in Good Will Hunting. So I couldn't really think of it, but he suggested also the grapes of wrath. And I was like, you know what? You're right. That is a movie about the plight of being poor and white, right? I'm not talking about just being poor, because you can just go to like not the Beverly Hillbillies. They were poor, then they became rich. Or Little House on the Prairie, right? I'm sure somebody was probably typing that in. But they were poor, but there was no plight associated to them being poor. So that's like all I can think of. I mean, the state of Jones during the Civil War, the story about That story took place during the Civil War. So that's 3. But when you think of the narrative associated with being poor and black, I mean, I don't even have to go into that. I mean, name a movie or a TV show or something that doesn't depict the storyline about being poor and black. I can tell you ones that didn't, like, you can say The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, The Cosby Show, Good Times, right? Not Good Times, but The Jeffersons. But my point is, there is a narrative for whatever reason, right? I'm not going to get into that, so you don't have to, in the comments, you don't have to say, it's because of racism, it's because of race. Look, I ain't saying that. I'm talking about the narrative, right? And I believe that narrative is dangerous if that's all you're hearing, because factually, right, every black person doesn't live a life of their lives in destitution, right? Or is that a word? Every black person doesn't live a life, squandering in the garbage, living in the dangerous neighborhoods, uneducated, everybody's in the gang. But, perception can be your reality. And we have to be aware of things like that. And I hope someone sees that besides myself and a few of my friends. And this is why. Running a little long here, but I'm going to wrap this up with this. There's an 11% and there's an 89%. And the 89% is a group of people we never hear about. Never hear about. And those are the people who had nothing to do with slavery at the height of slavery. And that group of people were called poor whites in the antebellum South. They had nothing to do with slavery in that they couldn't afford them. Matter of fact, they couldn't afford land, right? And if you couldn't afford land up until like the late 1700s, I think North Carolina was the last one to give universal suffrage to white men without land, right? So the poor whites in antebellum South, none of them went to Congress. There were no senators. It was only well-to-do, wealthy landowners who owned slaves who ran the South. And the reason this is important is because the 11% who did own the slaves projected a reality that wasn't true. And I'll show you how they did this and I'll walk you through how this happened. And they ended up fighting the Civil War to their own detriment, meaning those who didn't have slaves, right? So if you're still here, please like, share, and subscribe. I got to keep mentioning that. I've been told, someone whispered that in my ear, you should always get people to like, share, and subscribe. So here we go. So if you're an EMT today, and let's say you're making $20 an hour, and I don't know how much EMTs make, but let's just say you're making $20 an hour, and you're proud of your job, really proud. Yeah, you can make more money. Yes, you would like to make more money. Maybe you'll move up the ranks and make more money. Maybe you go into the hospital system, whatever. But you're proud of what you're doing, and you're making $20 an hour. And then a piece of legislation is passed to make the minimum wage $18.50 per hour. How would you feel about being an EMT then? Would you feel exactly the same? Or do you feel like I'm getting a little closer to the bottom of the skill set on the economic ladder? Not to say that people making $18.50 per hour as a minimum wage are not valuable. But, if you took the time to go to school to be an EMT, you're proud of it, your family's proud of you, and now you're making like $1.50 more than someone with no training whatsoever who's working at, McDonald's, right? You're not going to feel that great. So that's kind of what happened in the South. The Southerners took a view of manual labor as being the equivalent or being like on equal footing with slavery. And since the slaves were the only ones, slaves only did manual labor. Sorry. Anyone who did any manual labor was associated with that class of people. That's one. So you don't want to be associated with that class of people. And so that's how, in my opinion, you got this white superiority complex or theory or, perspective to creep in into that society, was because you got basically 89% of that population were poor, a lot of them landless, and one step above slavery. But they got to feel good about themselves because, hey, at least they're not black, and being black is associated with slavery. In the meantime, those poor whites were directly in competition with the richest white people in the South because they owned all the slaves and slaves worked free of charge. So you have to compete as a poor white person with no land with a slave owner who can charge little to nothing for a slave. And that they pushed this perception of this white superiority onto the poor white people to make them, to basically blind them from the fact that they're being screwed over. And I think we are kind of in danger of this happening now, where this narrative of just black people being victims, and now white people just being guilty, and we got white people washing black people's feet. Look, kumbaya, everybody, yes. But somebody needs to stop and think about this. No matter what your color is, no matter what you believe, you spend money, and the ability of the spending power of your money is dwindling. And we need to pay attention to this. This is hard. I admit this is complex. It may seem kind of all over the place, and I apologize for that, but stick around. I just wanted to get this out there to plant that seed in your mind that, one, Antifa are a bunch of anti-capitalists trying to bring the whole system down. And if you are down with that, you hate capitalists, and you want to bring them all down, you hate Mr. Bezos, what are you going to replace that with? And I can ask you another question. If you hate capitalism, which we really don't have, at best we got crony capitalism, but if you really want to replace the capitalist system, what are you going to replace it with? And when do these capitalists become evil? For example, when Jeff Bezos was in his garage selling books, how did he directly or indirectly affect your life? And now that he's like the richest man or one of the richest men in the world, how does he directly or indirectly affect your life? Well, as a customer, he directly affects your life. If you work for him, he definitely affects your life. If you're a mortgage company, he's definitely affecting your life because people who work for him have mortgages. If you sell cars, he directly affects your life because if people work for him, they buy cars. If you're a small business owner selling the product on the internet, he probably directly affects your life because you're selling your product on Amazon. If you're an author, he directly has affected your life because he has given you a platform to sell your books. I'm an author. I have a memoir. I'll leave a link to my book, my memoir, below in the comments. It's won 2 awards and all 5 stars so far. So check it out. So I believe in capitalism. It's the Broke Capitalist show, right? So I'm a fan of capitalism and what it's done for everybody, including black people. But that narrative let you hear anything positive about capitalism and black people. They don't. It just you'll never hear. You'll never hear. I think I'll go there. I think I'm ranting. But if you got something out of this, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave some comments below. Please be respectful. Other people read those comments. Again, I don't mean to offend. I'm definitely not apologizing for anybody. And I just want people to know, if I can get anything across in this time that I've been talking to you, beware of that narrative, right? Beware of that narrative. And next time, we'll talk some more about the narrative. It's called Our New Narrative. Okay, until next time, have a good one. Bye.